Welcome back to Dark Cinema Recaps, where horror is for life, not just for October. And today we have got our full Exorcist collection, starting with The Beginning, going to Dominion, to Exorcist, Heretic, Exorcist 3, finishing with Believer. Thank you to anybody who has watched this series so far, liked, commented, all the rest of it. Really do appreciate it. This is also coinciding with the Hatchet series finishing as well. And then coming up next, we got Strangers Pray at Night. We've got See No Evil 2. That's going to kind of round off them series. And then we are going back into the world of Wrong Turn, because we've got a lot of Wrong Turn films to cover. And we're also going to be starting Hellraiser as well. And that goes into some very strange places. Some good, some absolutely terrible, and I can't wait to cover that. But until then, let's get cracking. Exorcist: The Beginning. In the age of the Crusades, an injured priest wanders through the aftermath of a bloody and desolate battlefield. He comes across an impaled soldier in his death throes holding a Pazuzu head pendant. The priest looks around him and sees hundreds of crusaders crucified upside down across the desert. In Cairo, Egypt, 1949, a young Father Lancaster Merrin struggles with his shattered faith. He is haunted by an incident in a small village in the occupied Netherlands during World War II, where he served as a parish priest. Near the end of the war, a sadist Nazi commander, in retaliation for the murder of a German trooper, forced Merrin to participate in arbitrary executions in order to save a full village from slaughter. Merrin is approached by a collector of antiques named Samila, who invites him to become a British excavation in a valley called Dereti in the Turkana region of British Kenya. That was a mouthful. The dig excavates by Christian Byzantine era church built circa 500 AD, long before Christianity had reached the region of Africa. Samila asks Merrin to recover an ancient relic of a demon thought to be in the church before the British can find it. Merrin agrees and travels to the dig site. He is joined by Father Francis. Upon arriving at the site with their translator and guide Chuma, Merrin meets chief excavator and British man named Jeffries with visible boils on his face, and Sarah Novak, a doctor. In addition, Merrin learns that the diggers are disappearing or leaving in droves because local tribesmen fear the church is cursed. Merrin witnesses a digger inexplicably experience a seizure. Merrin, Chuma and Francis visit the dig site only to find the dome uncovered. The rest of the church is buried beneath the earth. Merrin discovers that the church is in perfect condition, as though it had been buried immediately after it was constructed and completed. The three enter the church through the dome and find the place in near pristine condition, but note two disturbing oddities. The statue of angels holding weapons points spears downward instead of triumphantly towards heaven, and someone has vandalized and desecrated the church, placing the cross in an upside down position. Merrin and Francis deduce the sculptors were trying to depict the angels restraining something that was beneath the church. Determined to learn more about the archaeological dig, Merrin asks to consult with lead archaeologist Monsieur Besson. Sarah tells Merrin that Besson went insane 3 weeks earlier and was transferred to a mental hospital in Nairobi. Merrin visits Besson's tent at the dig site and sees dozens of drawings of the same demon artifact the collector had asked Merrin to find. Merrin visits Besson, but when he enters his room, he discovers that Besson had carved a hook cross on his chest and is speaking of the voice of the Sadic SS commander who tormented Merrin during the war. Besson then slashes his own throat after saying he was free. Father Giannetti, warden of the asylum, speculates that Besson was not possessed but rather touched by a demon, which drove him mad and eventually to suicide. Merrin is very skeptical, but before he can return to the dig site, Father Giannetti gives him the volume of Roman rituals to use in the exorcism, although Merrin claims that he will never use them. Upon returning to the village, strange events continue. A local boy is attacked and killed by hyenas that seem to continuously stalk the dig night and day. His younger brother Joseph enters a fugue state after watching his brother get ripped to pieces. the local chief's wife gives birth to a stillborn baby who is covered in maggots, and Jeffries, a man involved with the dig, gets attacked in a bar. Around the same time, Mary discovers a passageway leading to a cave underneath the church that houses an ancient pagan temple with a statue of the demon Pazuzu. He also finds evidence that his temple was used to conduct human sacrifices. Upon his return, he sees a local tribe cremate the stillborn baby. This makes Merrin suspicious because of the stories of an epidemic that wiped out an entire village in the valley 50 years earlier. He had been told that the dead were buried in a graveyard just outside the valley. When he digs up the graves of the supposed victims of this plague, they are empty. Merrin confronts Father Francis about it, and Francis reveals to him the history of Dorothy Valley. A great army led by 2 priests came to the valley searching for the origin of evil 1500 years prior. When they arrived in the valley, the evil presence consumed them and one killed the other. When the lone surviving priest made it back, Emperor Justinian ordered a church to be built over the site, and then buried to seal the evil force inside of it. The builders of the church never meant to be recorded in Vatican documents. However, a vague reference to it was recorded and found in 1893. 4 priests subsequently came to the Dorothy and enlisted the local tribe to help them. All of the tribesmen and the priests disappeared. The Vatican then ordered that a false graveyard to be built around the stories of the plague spread around to keep people away from the valley. All of the tribesmen and priests disappeared. The Vatican ordered that the false graveyard be built and stories of the plague to be around to keep people away from the valley. Francis reveals that it is believed that the Valley of Dorothy was a traditional spot of Lucifer's fall after the war in heaven. Later, Merrin, Schumer, and Major Granville discovered Jeffries tied up in the church with his organs pecked out by crows. The dig's doctor, Sarah, turns out to be the possessed individual, and she kills Francis. Merrin has the demon exorcised in the tunnels below the church, but she dies. Merrin and Joseph emerge from the church, once again buried in sand, and history repeated itself. Only Father Merrin and the little boy are left as the British soldiers and the local tribes have annihilated each other. Sometime later, Merrin, once again a priest, returns to Rome and meets with Somalia at a cafe, explaining he was unable to find the relic. Somalia replies, "But you found something, didn't you?" In 1944, a Nazi SS lieutenant named Kessel forces a parish priest of a small village in occupied Holland, Father Lancaster Merrin, to participate in arbitrary executions in retaliation for the murder of a German trooper in exchange for sparing the village. Now, I'll be honest, in a bad film, this scene was tits. It was really, really well done. In 1947, Merrin, whose faith was shattered by the incident, is an archaeologist in Dorothy, a remote area in Turkana region of British Kenya, excavating Byzantine church built around the 5th century, long before Christianity had reached that region of Africa. I know, it sounds familiar, doesn't it? But apparently this is all canon. Last one was canon, this one's canon. I don't make the rules. He meets up with Father Francis and Major Granville, the British military officer overseeing the dig, making their way to Dorothy with Schumer, Merrin's translator and guide. Merrin introduces Francis to Rachel, a doctor of Imqui, an enthusiastic convert who provides accommodation for the 2 men. That was a mouthful. As they tour the dig site, Merrin and Francis notice that the church in perfect condition, as though it had been deliberately buried immediately after the construction was complete. On the site, Merrin meets a disabled young outcast named Chechi. Although dissuaded by Schumer, Merrin brings the boy to Rachel for medical treatment. Once the door is uncovered, Merrin, Francis and Schumer go inside the church. A hidden passageway leads them to a crypt containing a demonic idol, an ancient sanctuary where human sacrifice was performed. Merrin deduces that the church was expressly built to seal its underground temple. On their way back, they are confronted by local elders who demand Merrin stop digging. Francis contacts Granville to send a detachment to guard to dig against potential robbers. Despite Merrin's objections, 2 British soldiers attempting to loot some precious stones from the church are then found dead the next day. Despite the Christian symbolism used in the murders and the testimony to local warrior Jomo that the 2 men were affected by strange madness, Granville, blaming the Takana, goes to town to uncharacteristic fit of rage, demanding the purported culprit be given up, shooting a young woman in cold blood when the locals protest. Determined to stop the Christian evil from spreading, Jomo breaks into the mission school and slaughters the students, including one of Imekwe's sons, before he is shot on the spot by British soldiers. Francis has a disturbing realization that Cheche's unusual recovery was not a divinely wrought miracle as he first thought, and considered baptizing him to save his soul. The boy accepts on the condition that he be held at the church. Meanwhile, a shaken and guilt-ridden Granville commits suicide by shooting himself in the mouth. Takana elders demand that the church be reburied, and Francis, who they hold responsible for the spread of Christian evil and the arrival of the British troops, and Cheche be handed over to them and killed, but are turned down. Francis, assisted by Rachel, baptizes Cheche at the church, but the demon inside the boy attacks them. Realizing an exorcism is in order, Francis leaves quickly to fetch a copy of a Roman ritual. An earthquake erupts and seals the entrance to the church. The next morning, Merrin and the British find Francis tied to a tree, naked and shot with arrows. The dying Francis reveals to Merrin that Cheche is possessed and begs him to perform the exorcism. Another earthquake shifts the rocks, unblocking the church entrance just enough to allow Merrin to go inside. At the underground temple, Merrin finds Rachel, who runs away under a trance, and the possessed Cheche. After donning Francis's vestments, Merrin returns to the church to begin the exorcism. The demon offers Merrin a chance to rewrite his past, at which Merrin, in an hallucination, finds himself back in 1944 Holland when he refuses to cooperate. Kessel instead of Merrin, and all the villagers are killed for his defiance. When Merrin comes back to his senses, the demon mocks the futility of his attempt to change what happened. An aurora appears in the sky as the evil spirit's influence causes the entrance Rachel to attempt to kill herself. Imekwe has violently beat his wife and the Takana to charge into battle against the British. The exorcism eventually succeeds and the demon leaves Cheche's body, causing him to regress to his former condition. With the demon exorcised, life in Dorote returns to normal and the British detachment leaves. One of the local elders, however, warns that the demon will pursue Merrin. Merrin bids farewell to Rachel and Cheche before leaving for Rome, having his faith now regained. In northern Iraq, priest Lancaster Merrin takes part in an archaeological dig in the ancient ruins of Hatra. During the dig, he finds stone talisman of winged being that evokes a concerned look on his face. He then has a vision, which a giant version of the same being appears nearby, silently confronting him. In Georgetown, Washington, actress Chris McNeil is starring in a film directed by her friend Burke Dennings. McNeil, along with her 12-year-old daughter Reagan, rent a luxurious house with servants. Meanwhile, Father Damien Karras, a psychiatrist who counseled Georgetown University priests, visits his ailing mother in New York. He confides to a colleague that he is having a crisis of his faith. Chris hosts a party for Karras' friend, Father Dyer, who explains Karras' role as counselor and notes his mother's recent death. Reagan, seemingly unwell, appears and urinates on the carpet before Chris comforts her. Reagan's bed shakes violently after Chris returns her to it. Later, Dyer consoles Karras, guilty of not having been with his mother when she died. Reagan's personality becomes violent. Medical tests find no physical cause. During a house call, Reagan exhibits abnormal strength. One night, Chris finds the house empty except for a sleeping Reagan. Dennings is found dead beneath Reagan's window. Detective William Kinderman questions Karras, confiding that Dennings' head was turned backwards. Reagan's body becomes covered with sores. Kinderman tells Chris that the only plausible explanation for Denning's death is that he was pushed from Reagan's window. As Kinderman leaves, Reagan has another violent fit, stabbing her with a crucifix and turning her head backwards. "Do you know what she did, your hunting daughter?" She is confined to her bedroom. Chris seeks out Karis, who visits Reagan. The possessed Reagan claims to be the devil and projectile vomits into Karis' face while speaking in tongues. The demon says it will remain in Reagan until she is dead. At night, Chris's assistant calls Karis to the house. He concludes that an exorcism is warranted. His superior grants permission on the condition that an experienced priest lead the ritual. Father Lancaster Merrin, having performed an exorcism before, is summoned. Merrin arrives at the house. As the priest read from the Roman ritual, the demon curses them. The priest rests, and Merrin, shaking, takes nitroglycerin. Karis enters the bedroom where the demon appears as his mother, perturbing Karis despite his denials. Merrin excuses Karis and continues the exorcism by himself. Karis assures Chris that Reagan will not die and re-enters the room, finding Merrin dead from a heart attack. Enraged, Karis beats the possessed Reagan and demands the demon take him instead. The demon rips the medallion of St. Joseph from Karis' neck and possesses him, freeing Reagan. Karis hurls himself out the window, tumbling down the stone stairs outside. Chris and Kinderman enter the room. Chris embraces the healed Reagan and Kinderman surveys the scene. Outside, Dyer administers the dying Karis' last rites. The McNeils prepare to leave, and Father Dyer says goodbye. Despite having no memory of her ordeal, Reagan, moved by the sight of Dyer's clerical collar, kisses him on the cheek. As the McNeils leave, Chris and Dyer give the medallion found in Reagan's room. Dyer briefly examined the steps where Karis died, before walking away. Philip Lamont, a priest struggling with his face, attempts to exorcise a possessed woman in Latin America who claims to heal the sick. However, the exorcism goes wrong, and the woman knocks over the lit candles by setting the place ablaze. A lit candle inadvertently sets fire to her dress, killing her. Afterward, Lamont is assigned by the Cardinal to investigate the death of Father Lancaster Merrin, who had been killed 4 years earlier in the course of exorcising the siren demon Pazuzu from Regan McNeil. The Cardinal informs Lamont that Merrin is facing heresy charges because of the controversial writings, as church authorities are trying to modernize and do not want to acknowledge that Satan exists. Reagan, although now seemingly normal and staying with her guardian Sharon Spencer in New York City, continues to be monitored at a psychiatric institute by Dr. Gene Tuskin. Reagan claims that she remembers nothing about her ordeal in Washington, D.C., but Tuskin believes her memories are repressed. Father Lamont visits the institute, but his attempt to question Reagan about the circumstances of Merrin's death are rebuffed by Tuskin, who believes that Lamont's approach would do Reagan more harm than good. In an attempt to plumb her memories of the exorcism, and specifically the circumstances in which Merrin died, Tuskin hypnotizes Reagan, to whom she is linked by a synchronizer, a revolutionary biofeedback device used by two people synchronizing their brainwaves. After a guided tour by Sharon of the Georgetown house where the exorcism took place, Lamont returns to be coupled with Reagan to the synchronizer. The priest is spirited to the past by Pazuzu to observe Merrin exorcising a young boy, Kukumu, in Africa, learning that the boy develops special powers to fight Pazuzu, who appears as a swarm of locusts. Lamont journeys to Africa, defying his superior, to seek help from the adult Kukumu. Kukumu has become a scientist studying how to prevent locust swarms. Lamont learns that Pazuzu attacks people who have psychic healing abilities. Reagan is able to read telepathically inside the mind of others. She uses this to help an autistic girl speak as she waits to see Tuskin. Tuskin and her staff are shocked, but the girl's mother is too overjoyed to care. and despite Tuscan's attempt to keep them in the office to figure out what happened, insists going home so the girl's father can hear her as well. Father Merrin, who belonged to a group of theologians that believed psychic powers would be a spiritual gift that one day could be shared by all people, thought people like Kakumu and Reagan were the forerunners of this new type of humanity. In a vision, Merrin asked Lamont to watch over Reagan. Lamont and Reagan returned to the old house in Georgetown. The pair followed in a taxi by Tuscan and Sharon, who are concerned about Reagan's safety. En route, Pazuzu tempts Lamont by offering him unlimited power, appearing as a succubus who is a doppelganger of Reagan. The taxi crashes into the Georgetown house, killing the driver, but Tuscan and Sharon survive. At the front of the house, Sharon sets herself on fire. Although Lamont initially succumbs to the succubus, he is brought back by Reagan and attacks her doppelganger, while a swarm of locusts deluges the house, which begins to crumble around them. However, Lamont manages to kill the doppelganger by beating open its chest and pulling out its heart. In the end, Reagan banishes the locusts and Pazuzu by enacting the same bull roar ritual attempted by Kakumu to get rid of locusts in Africa. Outside the house, Sharon dies from her injuries, and Tuscan tells Lamont to watch over Reagan. Reagan and Lamont leave, while Tuscan stays to answer police questions. And in 1999, 15 years after Reagan McNeil's exorcism in 1975, Father Dyer and Lieutenant William F. Kinderman reminisce about Father Damien Karras. The following night, an incident at a church occurs indicating the presence of an evil supernatural entity, which causes a crucifix to open its eyes. The next scene then follows with the perspective of a man walking down the street speaking of a dream falling down a long flight of steps, suggesting that someone is committing murders linked to the Karras death. The next morning, Kinderman is called to find the body of Thomas Kinty, a black youth that has had his head replaced with a cut-off statue of Jesus. The fingerprints at the crime scenes do not match, indicating a different person was responsible for each murder. Kinderman reveals to the hospital staff that the murders, which will soon include Dyer, fit the modus operandi of James Vanneman, the Gemini Killer, a serial killer who was executed 15 years prior. Kinderman visits the head of psychiatric ward, Dr. Temple, who relates the history of one of his patients. The patient was found wandering aimlessly 15 years previously with amnesia. He was locked up, catatonic until he became violent and claimed to be the Gemini Killer. Kinderman sees that the patient is an old friend of Damien Karras. Karras' form appears to have briefly changed of that into the Gemini Killer. He expresses ignorance of Karras, but boasts of killing Father Dyer. That night, a nurse is murdered and Dr. Temple dies by suicide. Kinderman returns to see Karras, who once again changes into the Gemini Killer. The Gemini explains that he is being aided by a master, the same entity who had previously possessed Reagan. The master was furious about the exercise by Karras and is exacting his revenge by using Karras' body as a conduit for the Gemini to continue his killing spree. Each evening, the soul of the Gemini leaves the body of Karras and possesses the other patients elsewhere in the hospital, using them to commit murders. The Gemini also reveals to enforce Dr. Temple to bring Kinderman to him. The Gemini possesses an old woman and attempts to murder Kinderman and his family at their home, but the attack abruptly ends when Father Paul Morning arrives at the hospital and begins to perform an exorcism on Karras. The Master intervenes, taking over Karras' body, and Morning is severely mutilated. Kinderman rushes back to the hospital and attempts to euthanize Karras. The possessed Karras then torments and attempts to kill Kinderman. Morning manages to regain consciousness and tells Karras to fight. Karras regains his free will briefly and cries to Kinderman to shoot, killing Karras and freeing them both of Gemini and his master. Later, Kinderman watches Karras' funeral. Karras died, aged 40, on 9th of October, 1975. In Haiti, photographer Victor Fielden and his pregnant wife, Seren, are on their honeymoon until a massive earthquake ensues. Suren is gravely injured, and paramedics tell Victor he must choose to save his wife or his child. 13 years later, Victor has lost his faith in God since Suren's death and raising his daughter Angela on his own in Georgia. One day after school, Angela ventures into the woods and with her Baptist best friend Catherine to perform a seance in an attempt to contact Angela's mother. The girls go missing and a 3-day manhunt ensues. The girls are found in a barn on the 3rd day. Though traumatized, they seem relatively normal, having only suffered burns to their feet. The next day at home, Angela attacks Victor and begins convulsing, while Catherine has an outburst during a church service in which the sacrament of the Holy Communion is observed. Victor admits Angela into hospital, where their nurse and neighbour Anne attends to her. Catherine's mother, Miranda, begins to theorise that the girls have travelled to hell and brought a demon back with them. The girls' condition worsens. Anne, convinced that Angela is possessed, after the latter reveals her knowledge of Anne's experience to the novitate as a prospective nun and a secret abortion, gives Victor a memoir written by Chris McNeil, who experienced a similar situation with her daughter Reagan in 1973. Chris has spent her life researching exorcisms in every culture, while becoming world-renowned for her studies. Reagan became distant from her mother due to the memoirs and the success, and has not seen her since. Victor meets Chris, who visits Angela. Visiting Catherine's home, Chris performs a deliverance ritual on Catherine, who stabs Chris in the eyes with a cross, blinding her. Victor, Miranda, Tony and Anne reach out to the church for the exorcism. Chris advises Victor to use a method from all different cultures, and the group seeks help from Father Maddox, a local priest. Don Revens, Catherine's family's Baptist pastor, Stuart, a Pentecostal preacher, and Dr. Beehive, a rootwork healer. The group plans for an ecumenical exorcism, but the Catholic diocese forbids Maddox from participating as they feel that the children are suffering from a psychiatric disorder. The girls are tied to chairs as the group proceeds with the exorcism. Anne uses a crucifix and a St. Benedict medal engraved on it to battle the demon. The demon reveals that Victor did not choose to keep Angela alive 13 years ago. He chose Saron, but she died from her injuries. As Anne reads from the biblical text of Ezekiel 16 while holy water is poured on the children, the demon begins to shriek. The demon tells him that he needs to choose which of the girls gets to live and which one will die, and if a choice is not made, it will kill them both. While Miranda and Victor both refuse to forsake each other's child, Maddox, who has a change of heart, rejoins the group, and Maddox reads from the Roman ritual, only for the demon to snap his neck and kill him. Victor regains faith and begins to say the Lord's Prayer, which he learned as a child. As Victor apologizes to Angela and uses Saron's scarf to attempt to strengthen her against the demon, Tony yells that he chooses Catherine, and Angela flatlines. Suddenly, Catherine wakes up in another realm and screams for her parents as the demon chooses her, revealing that the one chosen would be the one who dies. The demon drags Catherine to hell. While Angela starts to breathe, police arrive as Miranda and Tony fail to resuscitate Catherine, and Victor tearfully reunites with his daughter. In the aftermath, Angela returns to school, Miranda and Tony mourn, and Victor visits Saron's grave. In the hospital, Chris is reunited with Reagan, who forgives her mother. And that was The Exorcist Believer, a sequel 50 years in the making.